The radar screen flickered in the pre-dawn darkness of Nelly's Air Force Base, Nevada. Senior Airman Marcus Webb leaned forward, squinting at the anomaly that had just appeared 30 miles east of restricted airspace. The blip moved with precision that made his pulse quicken, not erratic like a lost Cessna, not predictable like commercial traffic. It danced along the boundary of Area 51's outer perimeter with the confidence of something that knew exactly where the invisible lines were drawn. Webb reached for the radio but hesitated. The signature was civilian, a mid-sized business jet, but the flight pattern suggested military training. His supervisor, Master Sergeant Ramirez, appeared behind him with coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "What have you got?" Webb tapped the screen. "Unknown aircraft holding pattern just outside Dreamland's fence. Been there for 6 minutes, not requesting clearance, not turning away. Just waiting." Ramirez frowned. The Desert Sunrise was still 40 minutes away. An unauthorized aircraft near Area 51 typically resulted in two outcomes: immediate escort by armed fighters, or a very short, very classified incident report. IFF, Webb shook his head. Civilian transponder. Tail number comes back to a corporate Gulfstream registered to some logistics company in Seattle. Flight plan filed for Henderson Executive, but they diverted 20 minutes ago. Before Ramirez could respond, the radio crackled. "Nelly's Tower, this is November 7-3 Tango Whiskey, requesting priority landing, single ship, declaring minimum fuel." The voice was calm, almost bored, but something in its cadence made both men pause. It carried the clipped precision of military training, yet the transponder screamed civilian. "Who the hell is that?" Ramirez muttered. Webb was already running the tail number through every database he had clearance for. The results made no sense. The Gulfstream belonged to Cascade Freight Solutions, a company that apparently moved medical supplies and emergency cargo throughout the Pacific Northwest. No government contracts, no military ties, nothing that explained why it was hovering outside America's most sensitive airspace at 500 hours. The aircraft suddenly broke its holding pattern, banking hard left with a snap roll that no civilian pilot should attempt in a business jet. Webb's mouth went dry. "That's not a commercial pilot." Ramirez grabbed the secure line to scramble the alert fighters, but the radio spoke again. "Nelly's Tower, November 7-3 Tango Whiskey, I have them on radar. Your Raptors just left the barn. Tell them Ghost Rider says hello." The line went dead silent. Every controller in the room stopped moving. Ghost Rider. The call sign hadn't been used in active duty for 8 years. Not since the pilot who earned it vanished from service records after an incident that remained classified above top secret. Ramirez's hand trembled slightly as he lifted the radio. "November 7-3 Tango Whiskey, identify yourself immediately." The response came through with static that seemed almost deliberate, a pause pregnant with meaning that stretched across the airwaves like a challenge. "Tower, Ghost Rider. Authorization code Delta Whiskey 779er Tango Alpha. Requesting immediate landing on runway 21 left. I believe you'll find my credentials are still active." Webb's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up classified personnel databases that required 3 separate authentications. What appeared on his screen made him lean back slowly, eyes widening. Master Sergeant Ramirez looked over his shoulder and whispered a curse that would have gotten him written up in any other circumstance. The service record was sparse, redacted in places that suggested operations so black they didn't officially exist. But the photograph showed a woman in her early 30s, dark eyes that seemed to stare through the camera lens with an intensity that made Webb uncomfortable even through a decade-old digital image. Captain Vesper Kane. Call sign, Ghost Rider. 57 confirmed combat sorties in Syria and Afghanistan. 17 air-to-air kills, though that number had an asterisk that led to a classification level Webb didn't have clearance to read. Decorated with 3 distinguished flying crosses, 2 silver stars, and a Purple Heart. And then, 8 years ago, her record simply stopped. No discharge papers, no retirement ceremony, just a single-line notation, transferred to civilian status per presidential directive. Outside, the two F-22 Raptors from the 433rd Weapons Squadron screamed into the darkness, their Pratt and Whitney engines painting contrails of sound across the desert. Major Kyle Hendricks led the flight, his wingman Lieutenant Amy Cross holding formation 300 feet off his starboard wing. Hendricks had been briefed on possible intrusions, Russian reconnaissance, Chinese drones, even cartel aircraft probing defenses. Nobody mentioned a Gulfstream with a ghost's call sign. Viper 11 has visual, Hendricks reported, his fighters' targeting systems painting the business jet in infrared. The Gulfstream flew straight and level, maintaining exactly 285 knots at 18,000 feet. Single ship, civilian configuration, no visible weapons. Jesus Christ, they're squawking the old authentication codes. Lieutenant Cross pulled slightly ahead, positioning herself for a better angle. Viper 12 confirms that aircraft is flying a combat spread formation by itself, compensating for a wingman that isn't there. Hendricks felt ice slide down his spine. Combat spread was a tactical formation where two aircraft separated horizontally to provide mutual support while maintaining offensive capability. Pilots trained in it developed instincts so deep they flew the pattern even when alone, automatically leaving space for the wingman who should be there. Only military pilots flew that way. Only combat veterans couldn't turn it off. November 7-3 Tango Whiskey. This is Viper 11. You are in restricted airspace. Identify yourself and follow my aircraft to Henderson Executive immediately. The radio remained silent for 3 heartbeats. Then that voice came through again, and this time Hendricks heard something beneath the professional tone. Weariness, maybe, or the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying secrets too heavy to share. Viper 11 Ghost Rider, negative on Henderson, I'm landing at Nellie's. You can escort me in or you can watch me land, but I'm not turning around. Hendricks glanced at his heads-up display where the Gulfstream maintained course with the steadiness of a machine. Ghost Rider, you are not cleared for Nellie's. That call sign has been inactive for 8 years. Provide verification or I will be forced to consider you hostile. Another pause, shorter this time. Major Hendricks, you graduated top of your class from weapons school in 2021. Your instructor was Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Valdez. On your final evaluation flight, you attempted a high-G barrel roll at 12,000 feet and blew both engines. Valdez landed your aircraft dead stick while you were blacked out from G-forces. That incident doesn't appear in your official record because she made sure it wouldn't end your career. Hendricks' breath caught. That incident was known to exactly 3 people, himself, Colonel Valdez, and whoever had been flying chase that day in an unmarked F-16. The chase pilot who had talked them through the emergency, whose voice he'd heard only once and never seen. How do you know that? Because I was flying chase, Major. Because Patricia Valdez is the reason I'm still alive, and I made her a promise to look after her students. Hendricks exchanged glances with Lieutenant Cross over the secure channel. Viper 12, you getting this? Copy lead. That's some seriously classified information. Either we're talking to Ghost Rider or someone who knows things they absolutely shouldn't. The Gulfstream began a shallow descent, perfectly executed, maintaining optimal glide ratio, as if the pilot could feel the air itself. Hendricks had flown with some of the best aviators in the world, and even they didn't fly with this kind of precision. Tower, Viper 11. I recommend we allow November 7-3 Tango Whiskey to land. Authentication appears valid. Ramirez's voice came through tight with tension. Viper 11, be advised, we're confirming credentials now. Maintain escort position. Ghost Rider, you are cleared to land runway 21 left. Emergency vehicles will be standing by. And ma'am, welcome back to Nellie's. The Gulfstream's landing lights flickered on, cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like amber eyes opening after a long sleep. Hendricks watched the business jet descend with the grace of a fighter, touching down with barely a whisper of rubber on concrete. He'd seen civilian pilots attempt military-style landings before. They always came in too fast or too shallow, overcorrecting at the last second. This was different. This was a pilot who could probably land on a carrier deck in a crosswind with her eyes closed. As the Gulfstream taxied toward the military ramp, An unmarked black SUV appeared from the direction of base command, followed by two security vehicles with lights flashing. Hendricks brought his Raptor around for landing, his mind racing through possibilities. Ghost Rider. Colonel Valdez had mentioned that call sign once, late at night after too many drinks at a remembrance ceremony. She'd called the pilot the best she'd ever seen, someone who could make an F-16 do things that violated physics. Lieutenant Cross touched down behind him, and together they taxied toward the growing cluster of vehicles surrounding the Gulf Stream. The business jet's engine spooled down with a whine that seemed almost reluctant, and for a long moment nothing moved. Then the cabin door opened, and stairs extended automatically. The woman who emerged wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a leather jacket that had seen better days, and aviator sunglasses despite the fact that the sun hadn't broken the horizon yet. She moved with the economy of motion that came from thousands of hours in cockpits where every inch mattered, where inefficiency could mean death. Vesper Kane stood at the top of those stairs, and even from 100 yards away, Hendricks could feel her presence. She wasn't tall, maybe 5'6", with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, but she carried herself like someone who'd stared down death and made it blink first. A full colonel emerged from the lead SUV, and Hendricks recognized him immediately, Colonel James Reeves, commander of the 57th Wing, the organization responsible for all weapons testing and tactics development at Nellis. Reeves was a legend himself, with more than 3,000 hours in fighters and a reputation for suffering fools not at all. Vesper descended the stairs with slow deliberation, removing her sunglasses as she reached the tarmac. Hendricks couldn't hear their conversation from his cockpit, but he watched body language. Reeves standing stiff and formal, Vesper relaxed but alert, her eyes scanning the flight line with the automatic threat assessment of a combat pilot. Their exchange lasted less than a minute before Reeves gestured toward his SUV. Vesper shook her head, pointing instead at the Gulf Stream. Whatever she said made Reeves' expression shift from stern to something approaching concern. He nodded slowly, spoke into his radio, and then turned to scan the flight line until his eyes landed on Hendricks' Raptor. The radio crackled. Viper 1-1, Colonel Reeves. Exit your aircraft and report to the Gulf Stream immediately. Lieutenant Cross, secure the area and establish a no-approach perimeter of 200 feet. Nobody gets close without my authorization. Hendricks popped his canopy, the desert air hitting him with its characteristic dry heat that promised another 100-degree day. He climbed down from the Raptor, his flight suit soaked with the honest sweat that came from intercepting an aircraft that shouldn't exist, flown by a pilot who was supposed to be gone. As he approached, Vesper turned to face him fully. Her eyes were darker than her service photograph suggested, carrying the weight of things seen and done in places where the rules of engagement became more philosophical suggestions than actual rules. But there was humor there too, buried deep, the kind that came from surviving when you probably shouldn't have. Major Hendricks, she said, and her voice had the same quality he'd heard on the radio, professional, controlled, but with undercurrents that suggested volumes left unspoken. Thank you for the escort. Clean flying. Patricia would be proud. Hendricks saluted, uncertain of protocol when dealing with a captain who'd supposedly been civilian for 8 years. Vesper returned it with the casual precision of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Ma'am, I don't understand. Your record says you've been out for 8 years, 3 months, and 17 days, Vesper finished. But we both know that military service isn't something you just stop doing because the paperwork says so. Colonel Reeves cleared his throat. Captain Kane, perhaps we should continue this conversation in a more secure location. Vesper glanced at the Gulf Stream, then back at Reeves with an expression that suggested she was weighing options no one else in the conversation could see. With respect, Colonel, I'm not here for a reunion. I'm here because something is happening over the Pacific, and the people who need to know about it won't listen to anyone without stars on their shoulders. She reached into her jacket and produced a tablet that looked standard civilian issue but had the kind of ruggedized case that screamed military contractor. A few taps brought up what appeared to be radar tracking data, except the signatures made no sense. Hendricks leaned in despite himself. Those returns are impossible. Nothing moves like that. Nothing human, Vesper agreed. I've been tracking these signatures for 3 months. Started as anomalies during routine freight runs between Seattle and Anchorage. I wrote them off as atmospheric interference until I caught one on camera. She swiped to a photograph that made Hendricks' blood run cold. The image showed something in flight that had the basic configuration of an aircraft: wings, fuselage, tail surfaces, but proportions that suggested design philosophies completely alien to American or Russian or Chinese engineering. It looked organic somehow, as if grown rather than built. What am I looking at? Hendricks breathed. That's the question I've been asking for 3 months, Vesper said. And it's the reason I violated restricted airspace to get your attention. Because 2 days ago, one of my colleagues, another former military pilot flying freight in Alaska, encountered one of these things at 30,000 feet. He's been flying for 20 years, combat veteran, steady as they come. He put his aircraft down in Juneau and quit on the spot. Said nothing in his training prepared him for what he saw. Colonel Reeves studied the photograph with the intensity of someone running through possibilities and discarding each one as inadequate. Captain Kane, why bring this to us? Why not go through official channels? Vesper's laugh was short and sharp, devoid of humor. I tried official channels, Colonel. I filed reports with the FAA, sent encrypted data packages to 3 different Pentagon offices, even reached out to NORAD through back channels. You know what I got back? Polite acknowledgments and subtle suggestions that maybe I should take a vacation, that civilian life might be stressing me out. She turned to face him fully, and Hendricks saw something in her eyes that made him understand why her call sign was Ghost Rider. She had the look of someone who'd seen beyond the veil and couldn't quite come all the way back. So I got creative. I knew if I flew a pattern outside Dreamland's perimeter, maintained position long enough to spook the tower, and used my old call sign, eventually someone would scramble fighters. And eventually someone would remember who Ghost Rider was. The sun finally broke the horizon, painting the desert in shades of amber and gold. Vesper turned toward the light instinctively, and Hendricks noticed the scar that ran from her left temple down past her ear, disappearing beneath her collar. It was old, well-healed, but prominent enough that makeup couldn't hide it completely. That's from the incident, isn't it? He asked quietly. The one that got you transferred out. Vesper's hand moved unconsciously to touch the scar before she caught herself. There was no incident, Major. Officially, I developed a medical condition incompatible with high-G flight and accepted a generous retirement package to consult for civilian aviation companies. Unofficially, she paused, choosing words carefully. Let's just say I encountered something over Syria that didn't belong in our airspace or anyone's airspace. Something that made my F-16 look like a toy. I pursued it against orders, nearly got myself killed, and in the process recorded data that certain people decided was too sensitive to acknowledge. Colonel Reeves held up a hand. Captain, be careful. Whatever you're about to say, remember that Major Hendricks doesn't have the same clearances you had. Then get him the clearances, Vesper said flatly. Because whatever is flying over the Pacific isn't respecting our classification levels, and we're going to need every good pilot we have when this situation escalates. She pulled a drive from her pocket, military-grade encrypted storage that probably cost more than Hendricks' monthly salary. Everything I have is on here. Radar tracks, photographs, communication intercepts, and analysis from 3 different former military pilots who have encountered these things. We're not crazy, we're not confused, and we're not making this up. Reeves took the drive with obvious reluctance. I'll review this personally and forward it through appropriate channels. But Captain Kane, you need to understand that showing up unannounced in restricted airspace, using an inactive call sign, and making claims about unidentified aircraft is not the way to get taken seriously. With respect, Colonel, being polite and following proper procedure got me exactly nowhere. Sometimes you have to make noise to get heard. Vesper glanced at her Gulfstream, then at Hendricks. The Major here understands. He knows what it's like to see something that doesn't make sense, something that breaks all the rules. His instructors taught him that when you encounter the impossible, you trust your instruments and your instincts. Well, my instruments and my instincts are both telling me that we're not alone up there anymore. Lieutenant Cross's voice crackled over Hendricks' radio. Viper 1-1, I've got multiple security vehicles approaching your position. Whatever's happening, command wants it locked down tight. Colonel Reeves sighed, suddenly looking older than his 50-some years. Captain Kane, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me for debriefing. Your aircraft will be secured, and we'll arrange accommodations on base. Am I under arrest, Colonel? Let's call it protective custody until we sort out what you've brought us. Vesper smiled then, a quick flash of teeth that suggested she'd expected exactly this outcome. Fair enough. But Colonel, one more thing, the pilot who landed in Juneau. His name is Marcus Vance. Call sign Tombstone. He flew A-10s in Afghanistan, 200 combat missions, and he is not the kind of man who scares easily. Whatever he saw put that fear in him. You'll want to talk to him before he disappears completely. She handed over her tablet without argument, allowed security personnel to escort her toward Colonel Reeves' SUV, and paused only once to look back at Hendricks. Major, you ever hear of the Foo Fighters? The band. World War II pilots, European theater. They reported seeing strange lights following their bombers, balls of fire that could outmaneuver anything we had. Command wrote it off as enemy weapons, stress hallucinations, atmospheric phenomena. 70 years later, we still don't know what they saw. She climbed into the SUV. Sometimes the impossible is just the possible that hasn't been explained yet. The convoy pulled away, leaving Hendricks standing on the tarmac next to a civilian business jet that had just violated some of the most restricted airspace in America. Lieutenant Cross joined him, removing her helmet to reveal blonde hair dark with sweat. Well, that was the weirdest intercept of my career, she said. What do you think, Lead? Is she crazy? Hendricks watched the SUVs disappear toward base command. The sun continued its rise and the desert heat began building toward another punishing day. Somewhere over the Pacific, if Vesper Kane was telling the truth, something was flying that shouldn't exist, something that scared combat pilots enough to make them quit. I don't think she's crazy, he said finally. I think she's terrified, and that terrifies me. Lieutenant Cross nodded slowly. The old-timers talk about Ghost Rider sometimes, when they've had enough drinks. They say she was the kind of pilot who showed up once in a generation. The kind who could see 3 moves ahead in a dogfight, who flew on instinct that was more reliable than radar. If something scared her 8 years ago, scared her enough that they buried her service record and disappeared her into civilian life, then maybe we should have been paying attention when she tried to tell us something was wrong, Hendricks finished. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 fighter pilots considering the implications of a world where the sky held secrets darker than classified aircraft and experimental weapons. Finally, Cross spoke quietly. You know what bothers me most? She flew a combat spread pattern, solo. That means somewhere in her head, she's still expecting a wingman who isn't there, still flying like she's in a combat zone even though she's been out for 8 years. Hendricks had noticed the same thing. Combat spread was muscle memory for fighter pilots, but it faded with time away from tactical flying. The fact that Vesper still flew it suggested that in her mind she'd never left the combat zone. She'd just changed theaters. His radio crackled with Colonel Reeves' voice. Viper 1-1, report to Wing Command immediately. Bring Lieutenant Cross. This situation just got a lot more complicated. Hendricks and Cross exchanged glances, then jogged toward the squadron-ready room where they could store their gear before heading to command. The normally bustling morning flight line felt eerily quiet, as if Vesper Kane's arrival had cast a shadow over the entire base. At Wing Command, they found a conference room that had been hastily converted into something approaching a SCIF, Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility. Portable signal jammers hummed in the corners, and an armed security officer stood outside the door checking IDs with unusual thoroughness. Inside, Colonel Reeves sat with 3 other officers Hendricks didn't recognize. Their uniforms lacked unit patches, and they had the carefully neutral expressions of people who worked in the intelligence community. Vesper sat at the far end of the table, her hands folded calmly despite the fact she was clearly the subject of intense scrutiny. "Major Hendricks, Lieutenant Cross, take seats," Reeves ordered. "What you're about to hear is classified top-secret SCI. If you breathe a word of this outside this room without authorization, you'll spend the rest of your careers flying cargo planes in Antarctica." "Clear, clear, sir," they answered in unison. One of the intelligence officers, a woman with silver hair and cold gray eyes, leaned forward. "I'm Deputy Director Castellano, National Intelligence. Captain Kane's information has been reviewed, and I'm here to inform you that we've been tracking similar phenomena for approximately 6 months." Hendricks felt his stomach drop. "So she's telling the truth." "Captain Kane is telling her truth," Castellano corrected carefully. "Whether that truth aligns with objective reality is still being determined. However, we cannot ignore the fact that multiple credible observers, all former military pilots, have reported encounters with unidentified aircraft displaying flight characteristics that exceed current known technology." She activated a screen showing a map of the Pacific Northwest and Alaska. Dozens of red dots marked locations, clustered primarily along commercial flight routes. These represent reported sightings from civilian pilots, air traffic controllers, and ground observers over the past 6 months. Most were dismissed as drones, weather balloons, or misidentified conventional aircraft. But approximately 15% of these sightings came from observers with military aviation backgrounds. Castellano pulled up one of Vesper's photographs. "This image was taken by Captain Kane 3 weeks ago at 37,000 feet, approximately 200 miles west of Seattle. She was piloting a routine cargo flight when her aircraft's collision avoidance system detected an object on approach vector. The object maintained parallel course for approximately 4 minutes before accelerating vertically at an estimated rate of 60,000 feet per minute." Lieutenant Cross did the math quickly. "That's impossible. That's over 10 times the climb rate of an F-22. The G-forces alone would pulverize any human pilot," Castellano finished. "Yes, which brings us to 2 possibilities. Either this is an unmanned vehicle with capabilities far beyond our current technology, or it's piloted by something with a much higher tolerance for acceleration than human beings." The room fell silent. Hendricks stared at the photograph, trying to process what he was hearing. "You're talking about aliens." "I'm talking about unidentified aerial phenomena that require investigation," Castellano said, her tone suggesting she'd had this conversation before and didn't enjoy it. "The origin is less important than the capabilities. If these objects are foreign technology, Chinese, Russian, something from a program we haven't identified, then we have a serious national security problem. If there's something else," she left the implication hanging. Vesper spoke for the first time since Hendricks and Cross had entered. "They're not foreign technology. The flight characteristics are too far beyond anything even theoretical, and the behavior patterns suggest intelligence, but not the kind of intelligence that operates on our wavelength." Colonel Reeves frowned. "Explain." "Military aircraft, no matter what country builds them, follow certain principles. Energy management, threat assessment, tactical positioning. When I encountered one of these things over Syria, it didn't follow those principles. It moved like it was curious, not tactical. It paced my F-16 for almost a minute, close enough that I could see details, then accelerated away at angles that should have torn it apart. No heat signature, no visible propulsion, no communication signals. It was studying me." One of the other intelligence officers, a man with sharp features and skeptical eyes, leaned forward. "Captain Kane, you were debriefed after your Syria incident. Your testimony was deemed unreliable due to potential equipment malfunction and stress factors. Why should we believe this is any different?" Vesper's expression hardened. "Because this time I'm not alone. Because this time there are multiple witnesses, multiple data points, and documentation from sources that can't be easily dismissed. And because this time, whatever these things are, they're not staying away from populated areas. They're getting bolder." She pulled up another photograph, this one showing an object hovering approximately 100 feet above a fishing vessel off the Alaska coast. The crew had taken the picture with a cell phone, and while the quality was poor, the object was clearly visible, a dark shape against the gray sky, angular in ways that suggested deliberate design rather than natural formation. This was taken 4 days ago. The fishing crew reported that the object remained stationary for approximately 10 minutes before departing vertically at high speed. No sound, no exhaust, nothing to indicate conventional propulsion. The Coast Guard investigated and found elevated radiation levels in the water near where the vessel had been, consistent with electromagnetic effects. Deputy Director Castellano nodded. We've confirmed the radiation readings. We've also confirmed that 3 other vessels in the area reported similar sightings over the past 2 weeks. Whatever is happening, it's accelerating. Hendricks raised his hand slightly, feeling like a student in class. Ma'am, what does this have to do with us? We're fighter pilots, not intelligence analysts. Castellano smiled without warmth. Major, you're fighter pilots with recent intercept experience involving Captain Kane. More importantly, you're pilots who have demonstrated sound judgment under unusual circumstances. We need observers in the air, people who understand aviation and can distinguish between conventional aircraft and whatever these things are. She gestured to Vesper. Captain Kane has agreed to work with us in a civilian contractor capacity. She'll continue her regular freight operations, but she'll also be equipped with enhanced sensor packages and will report any anomalies immediately. We're establishing similar arrangements with other former military pilots operating in the affected region. Lieutenant Cross spoke up, her voice careful. You want us to escort civilian aircraft. We want you to be ready, Reeves corrected. If Captain Kane or any of our other observers encounters one of these phenomena, we need military aircraft in position to respond. Not to engage, I want to be absolutely clear on that, but to observe, document, and if necessary, protect civilian traffic. Vesper met Hendricks' eyes across the table. The Major and Lieutenant Cross did good work this morning. Clean intercept, professional approach, open minds when confronted with information that didn't fit their expectations. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Hendricks felt heat rise in his face, unsure whether he was being complimented or manipulated. Captain Kane, with respect, we intercepted you because you violated restricted airspace. That's not exactly a recommendation for judgment. I violated restricted airspace because I needed to get your attention, and I knew exactly how far I could push before lethal force became authorized, Vesper replied. Every decision I made this morning was calculated to achieve a specific outcome with minimal risk. That's the kind of thinking that kept me alive through 57 combat sorties, and it's the kind of thinking that might keep all of us alive if these sightings turn into something worse. The skeptical intelligence officer, his nameplate read Harrison, leaned back with crossed arms. Captain Kane, you've been out of active service for 8 years. You fly cargo planes. What makes you think you're qualified to assess these situations? For the first time, Vesper's professional mask slipped, and Hendricks saw anger flash in her eyes. I fly cargo planes because that was the condition of my survival, Mr. Harrison. I fly cargo planes because after I encountered something over Syria that your government decided was too sensitive to acknowledge, I was given a choice: accept a medical discharge and comfortable consulting fees, or have my service record buried so deep even I wouldn't be able to prove I existed. I chose to keep flying. She stood slowly, placing both hands flat on the table. I am qualified because I have seen these things up close. I am qualified because I know what it feels like when your instruments tell you one thing, your training tells you another, and your instincts scream that everything you know about aviation just became obsolete. And I am qualified because, unlike the people who dismissed me 8 years ago, I am still here, still looking up, still trying to find answers instead of burying questions. The silence that followed was profound. Even Harrison seemed taken aback by the intensity in Vesper's voice. Finally, Colonel Reeves cleared his throat. Captain Kane, sit down. Mr. Harrison, the captain's qualifications are not in question or she wouldn't be here. Let's focus on operational planning. Vesper remained standing for a moment longer, then slowly lowered herself back into her chair. The anger faded from her expression, replaced by the careful control she'd shown before. Hendricks realized he was seeing the real cost of her 8 years in civilian life, the constant need to prove herself, to be taken seriously despite being forced out of the world where she'd excelled. Deputy Director Castellano pulled up a new display, this one showing a patrol grid overlaying the Pacific Northwest. We're implementing a monitoring protocol starting immediately. Captain Kane and 4 other civilian pilots will maintain their regular schedules, but will be equipped with classified sensor packages disguised as weather monitoring equipment. Major Hendricks, your squadron will establish rotating combat air patrols over key transit corridors. If any of our observers reports contact, you'll be vectored to intercept. Rules of engagement, Hendricks asked. Observe and document only. Do not initiate hostile action unless directly threatened. Do not attempt to force intercept. These objects have demonstrated the ability to outmaneuver anything in our inventory. Your job is to gather data, not to engage in combat. Lieutenant Cross frowned. With respect, ma'am, if these things are as capable as Captain Kane suggests, what's the point of sending fighters? We can't catch them, we can't fight them, and we're just putting pilots at risk for no tactical gain. The point, Lieutenant, is that we need to demonstrate presence. We need to show these objects, whatever they are, whoever controls them, that we're aware of them and monitoring their activities. It's the same principle as Cold War intercepts with Russian bombers. We're not trying to shoot them down, we're establishing boundaries. Vesper spoke quietly. And we're learning. Every encounter is data. Every photograph, every radar track, every visual observation helps us understand what we're dealing with. 8 years ago, I saw one of these things for maybe 90 seconds. It wasn't enough. I've been flying these routes for 3 years and I've encountered similar phenomena 7 times. Each time I learn a little more. Each time the picture becomes clearer. What is the picture? Hendricks asked. That they're not hostile, at least not overtly. They observe us, they pace our aircraft, they sometimes interfere with our instruments, but they don't attack. I've never felt threatened, just studied. She paused, searching for words. Like being watched by something that doesn't quite understand what you are, but is intensely curious. There's an intelligence behind these things, but it's alien enough that communication might not even be possible in any conventional sense. Harrison snorted. Or they're drones and you're anthropomorphizing machines. Maybe, Vesper conceded. But machines built by whom? And for what purpose? If these are drones, they're operating with an autonomy and sophistication that surpasses anything in our inventory. And the fact that they've been appearing more frequently over the past 6 months suggests either an escalating surveillance operation or a preparation phase for something larger. The implications settled over the room like cold water. Colonel Reeves stood, signaling the meeting was approaching its end. Here's how this works. Captain Kane, you'll continue your civilian operations under the cover story that you're beta testing new navigation equipment for your employer. Major Hendricks, Lieutenant Cross, you'll brief your squadron leadership, only those with appropriate clearances, and establish the patrol protocols we discussed. Everyone in this room is now read into a program called Silent Observer. You don't discuss it outside authorized channels, you don't speculate about it with colleagues, and you absolutely do not talk to the media. He looked at each person in turn, making sure the message landed. This is not first contact. This is not War of the Worlds. This is a monitoring program for unidentified aerial phenomena. We collect data, we maintain security, and we let the people who get paid to analyze this kind of thing figure out what it means. Questions. Hendricks had about 1,000, but he settled for the most practical. Sir, what if one of these things poses an immediate threat to civilian or military aircraft? You follow your training. You protect American lives. But Major, be very careful about defining threat. Based on what we've seen, these objects are more likely to avoid contact than seek it. Don't create an international incident, or worse,